Well, welcome everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. On behalf of Michelle Bowles, wanted to welcome everybody to the Finance Audit and Costing Committee. Really appreciate everybody taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. As you can see, Michelle and I are the co-chairs, but today we're joined by a whole panel of experts and presenters that we think will really make this kind of an interesting topic. I would say it was my mistake, but you'll note on the agenda that this says a 90-minute session, but on your calendar it might say 60 minutes. It is actually 90 minutes. So the agenda is correct. We'll be here for 90 minutes. So hopefully everyone can stay for that amount of time. Next slide, please. As you can see in the description, this is what was in the agenda, but I think what I have down at the bottom is what's most important. This is a follow-up from our September discussions and other discussions we've had since then. And we really want this to be a real discussion and working session. So we're hoping to get your feedback. Lily's going to help us monitor the chat. Michelle is here to help respond to specific issues from the presenters and from the chat. And hopefully we can kind of make this an effective virtual Zoom meeting with under that construct. Next slide, please. As I'll talk about in a moment, you all identified through the ThoughtExchange in September a number of areas that you were interested in. And these are the topics that we'll be covering here today. As I mentioned, we have a whole slew of volunteer presenters that are going to present on these topics for a bit and then engage in some discussion with you and with Michelle, and then we'll jump to the next topic. I'll try to keep us on track and on time, but that will be largely driven by your interest. So if there's a lot of chat and a lot of feedback that Michelle and the committee needs as we go forward, we'll spend a little bit more time. If not, we'll try to move through these things as we continue to refine what we'll focus on in the coming months. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we have a whole group of presenters. We have Rick Fenger from University of Washington, Christy Keene from University of Chicago, Melissa Korf from Harvard Medical School, who I think was just presenting before this and will be presenting again after this. So thank you, Melissa. Nate from Duke University, Tim Reuter from Stanford, and Janet Straight from Cornell. So thanks in advance for your participation in this, because it really makes it much more engaging. Next slide. As I mentioned, and many of you may remember, our September discussion was driven by this thought exchange idea, where we posted what are the things that you want to talk about. And next slide, please. And out of that, if you remember, I think almost a very last slide in the September discussion was a poll where we asked, what are the number one things that you really want to talk about? What are the things that we need to focus on? And again, based on that is what our discussion is all about today, as well as some specific discussion with Michelle, knowing what NIH is focusing on and some key areas of input that she could use some engagement on is kind of the other critical area of input. Next slide. So again, thanks in advance to your participation and the presenters. And Michelle, now I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jim. So
Michelle, we heard you for a moment, but I don't hear you now if you're talking.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
I was about to have a complete meltdown. We don't need that at the beginning, guys. And so I'm not going to give a full NIH update, because for those of you that have been participating, you received the NIH update, full FDP update. But what I do want to do is go over just a few areas that I know you guys are probably itching to hear about. And so I'll start off with two main things that we've completed, and we'll probably be talking about one of them during our session. The notice of award cover page for HHS has been completed. And so there's a single look feel data collection, data imagery for the notice of awards for NIH. And so that was implemented in October of 2020. And so we are still working to make sure that that, along with all of the following pages, are aligned with the department's requirements and requests, as well as articulating our terms and conditions and outlining those very clearly, as we've always done. We also just completed the single portal PMS FFR initiative, where now, effective January 1, the all FFRs are submitted through the payment management system. And we know that there are plenty of pain points there. So we will be talking about that today. And I am really anxious to hear back from you guys to see what you're experiencing. And I want to share some examples that I've noted so we can talk through those a bit. And then for many of you, you know that we were talking about it, implementing or issuing information regarding other support starting January 25th. That effective date has been pushed back to March. And then we're also looking at implementation and compliance dates that would align with some of the concerns and challenges that I've heard from our recipients on changing systems, internal systems, to be able to accommodate some of the new information or additional information that we're going to be requesting and requiring. So more to come on that. You should see a guide notice that will come out probably within the next week or two that will outline those key dates for you. And I do want you guys to recognize and know that I've heard the cry from afar and near about the need to implement a compliance date that's reasonable. So we are talking through that as well. And then finally, this is truly just heart-wrenching for me, but the grants policy statement has been delayed more than I am comfortable with. And a large part of it is because we are definitely waiting for HHS to outline their adoption of 2 CFR Part 200, and that has been delayed. They did issue a final rule on a few provisions that will remain at 45 CFR Part 75. We want to be very cautious and during the transition, not to get out ahead of the department. We have been told to hold the policy statement. And so that's what we're doing, hoping that we can get that out within the next few weeks. It's with our general counsel, and many of the changes that we've outlined in the policy statement, you guys know about because of the NIH guide, right? And we just sweep those changes into the policy statement. But there are, the key is we need to get you a policy statement that outlines the administrative requirements. And that's something that you guys are accustomed to, and we're accustomed to providing to you. That is our mission, that is our goal. But we have been asked to hold it. So I am going to not promise how many weeks, but it should be not too many weeks. And I hope that we can get that out to you as sooner rather than later. So being said, I will stop. Those are all of the meaty and juicy topics that I thought you might want to hear about. We have had a lot of questions about the status of the policy statement. So I wanted to fill you in on that. And then of course, the other support.
That's great. Thank you, Michelle. At Duke, our IT people don't promise weeks or months. They promise seasons. So sometime in the summer or so anyway, not suggesting that, but just mentioning that.
Someone
next
said,
slide,
please
please.
clarify that March date, Michelle, is the date the forms will be released. So the March date is the date that we will outline what the requirements are in the forms. And yes, we will have the releasing of those forms. The compliance date will toggle. And so you should be able to access all of the new forms that have all of the required data elements in it for the other support collections, and for the transparency collections. But you won't, but what we won't be able to do is provide that in the guide notice. The guide notice is just going to alert you guys that it's coming, and it's coming in March. And then, of course, the compliance date will be that date that whatever we can get our leadership to agree to.
Thank you, Michelle. I think the next slide, Michelle, we were discussing whether you could give an overview on some of the FCTR elimination, the plans, and then we can give you some feedback and some thoughts on that.
Yes. And so with the the phase 2 for the FFR elimination, we actually believe that should be happening this fiscal year. And it will only require our recipients to certify expenditures in the PMS at the time of the drawdown. So you won't have to submit that federal financial cash transaction report. It's just going to be a certification. HHS hasn't really issued an update to the policy per se, but NIH will issue an update to our policy statement once that goes into effect. And if the policy statement is out by that time, then of course, we'll issue an NIH guide notice that will walk you and step you through the new policy, because we want to make sure that you have that new policy in hand for auditors, as this will change the requirement for the FCTR. It was originally planned for December just passed, but I think we're moving into probably, I'm going to use your terminology and your IT's terminology, Jim, spring. But we haven't had a lot of details on that just yet from the HHS, and likely it's because of all of the implementation of 2 CFR 200 that has kind of put them behind the 8 ball a little bit. So we have to be forgiving for that, because that was a huge undertaking. But for the most part, one of the things that I know is that this is going to change the way you guys operate in your various institutions. And we wanted to, at the very least, try to figure out how this new certification process is going to impact you guys. When you go into, issue or submit your federal cash transaction forms, that's going to be a different process then. And so I guess the question that I had as I was thinking about it is, what does this change look like for you guys? What are your current processes? When we make the change to not require this federal cash transaction report, what does that look like at your local level? Will you need for us to think about giving you guys time for implementation? Will us issuing policies help you move, quicker, more swifter to eliminate that piece? Do you need anything from us that would provide protections to your organizations so that you don't have to necessarily, request it or require something midstream? We've talked a long time about eliminating the federal cash transaction report. It's finally coming into a reality, but I really do want to know how or if it's going to impact you guys negatively, and what you need from NIH and some of the other OpDivs across HHS to help you move in the new direction. So I'm going to be quiet, and Jim, I don't know how we're planning to engage folks, but it would be really helpful just to hear from them.
Okay. Is there anybody on the Yeah, go, please.
Yeah. Hey, Michelle, this is Nate from Duke. Nice to see you almost. Probably the most immediate term thing is I know a later agenda topic, so I don't want to jump the gun, but the migration of the FFRs into PMS. That's, where a lot of the questions are coming from as they relate to the FCTR because of the requirement to match between the two and the timing problems that FCTR has always caused. So the most immediate change that we'll have is an easier time of submitting the FFRs because there won't be the attempt to match it back to an old number from the previous quarter. So the sooner the better for us.
Yeah. Okay. Others? And yes, Nate, you're right. We're going to get to these other pieces a bit later, but I just, you sometimes you think you're doing a good thing by undoing something, but I just don't know how it's going to impact many. But I see folks are actually agreeing with your sentiments. Nate, okay.
So Nate, and I saw Tim nodding his head too, but I mean, is there an on-ramp for this? I mean, when Michelle announces it, is there technical implications? Is there business process implications? Is there, those types of things, or is it pretty quick? Do we need lead time on this?
From my standpoint, no lead time is needed. The only question again is back to Nate's about, hey, when I submit the FFR and somebody goes out at NIH to approve it, if I only draw twice a month, so if the draw amount doesn't equal up with on the FFR, they're gonna not approve the FFR again. It's the same issue. So it's just the timing of that and whether or not they wait 2 weeks to approve or what's gonna happen with that.
Looks like we have a hand raised. Paige, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Thank you. Thank you. This is Paige Brown, University of Kentucky. I think we are excited for this to go forward quickly, but the one thing that I think we need would be the robust reporting out of PMS on an agency-wide level. Right now, we rely on the 272 reports that are released quarterly. For reconciliation, the ad hoc reports are very labor intensive and cumbersome and not easy to run on a large volume scale. And when we transitioned for NSF, we continue to have robust reports from them. So I think that will be crucial to making sure that we can continue our reconciliation processes when no longer required to do the FCTR submission. Has there been any thoughts about that, on how that information will be readily available in PMS?
That's a good question. And that's the kind of thing I'm looking for. And no, that has not been thought about nor talked about. So I would like to take that down. The only thing that I can say is that, from the NIH perspective, what we were thinking and what we are thinking is that the information on the FFR expenditure report, of course, would need to reconcile with whatever drawdowns. The piece that I think folks are thinking about is that there's now sub-accounts. So you can actually look down into the sub-account and see, what's unobligated. The thing that you can't necessarily see, though, is what's unliquidated. And that still probably would be needed to be, not probably, that still will be needed to be reported on the expenditures. But for the purposes of why the FCTR was used in times past, that purpose has gone away because there's no longer the pooled accounting. And so I think that that's where recipients need to be thinking that, it's no longer, submitting the FCTR to report out on whichever grant projects that you are, that you've drawn down from. At this point, we're in sub-accounts and out of the pool. And so your drawdown is project specific, and your expenditures need to be reported back up through the FFR expenditure portion. So I think that is the goal. I think we've always talked about it that way. And so having an understanding in terms of what you mean in terms of the reconciliation should be happening at the institutional level. But I'm not sure that PMS will even understand how to collect anything different apart from what you report on that expenditure. So if you want to talk a little bit more about that to help all of us understand that, that would be helpful.
Sorry, I muted myself quickly and then I couldn't unmute again. So specifically, we would continue the reconciliation process to manage our carry forward funds, obligations, make sure that we are reconciling our cash to expenses. And although we're not submitting any of this, reporting information directly to PMS, that is the source of the data we need to perform that reconciliation. So we would need our cash balances, which we now obtain from the person drawing. We pull that. The 272 has the expenses reported and the authorizations added. So maybe it's the ability to run a large report on authorizations and payments for a period of time so that we can reconcile in total to make sure that we're on the same page, because we've had some funds deobligated multiple times, or maybe we've received an authorization for additional funding, but it's not been posted in PMS. So we need those reports to be able to do that on an institution-wide basis. The FFR is typically done on an award level basis. So I think that's where I'm looking to reconcile the two processes from two different perspectives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think that that's going to be something that we anticipated was happening all along. And now, in terms of the reconciliation, I don't know that would differ. I'm not even sure how the drawdown and the reporting back up, it actually worked for your institution in the past on an institution-wide basis, but I'm sure that PMS can develop reports on an institutional-wide basis in order to help facilitate those. But we really would be looking for the recipients to conduct that reconciliation internally. And if there are reports that are needed and we need to look at the reporting options or the report options or menu that PMS currently has, and we need to expand that, that's something that we can raise with them. So thanks for.
And maybe that's accurate. Maybe they're available and we're just relying on the quarterly reports that are released because of our previous processes. So that's something that we will look at too, to make sure that we're not missing something that is already there and available to us to utilize. The other thing that I had was our program officers. I know we get a lot of questions that say you haven't drawn any funds and I'm not seeing any activity, and we have to prove by pulling information in PMS and providing it to them. So I guess my question, even with the line item draw, I guess my other side of the question would be, will they have access to activity that's a little bit easier for them to understand with this new transition?
The only thing that the only thing that is changing is the elimination. Again, that would be something from the PMS side. If there's data there that can be pulled from it and made available. And when you say your programs, I'm assuming your researchers or your faculty members. I don't know who the program or your sponsor's programs office may be, but that would be different for different recipients. And I'm just not sure that that piece has been considered. And maybe that's another kind of report in those tools. Oh, NIH individuals. Oh, okay. So you mean the program officials at the NIH level.
Right.
The program officials at the NIH level don't currently receive the reports at all. And they probably still won't, but they do have access and can have access to the PMS system to look in to see what the what your reporting, is that my thing doing that? Okay. To see what the reports are and how much is available. So they do have, they can request access to the payment management system, and they can do that now.
So Michelle, how do you want to manage time here? We can keep going on this topic if it's critical. That's one option. We can set up a working group and get some, try to find a volunteer to have some input and come up with a brief white paper for input to you. How would you like to do it?
That's up to you. I think the questions that have been asked here are pretty good.
Yes.
Paige, the only thing that I would be looking to do is identify reports, and that's something that we can work through together. Jim, I don't know that we need a working group for this one.
Okay, great. I didn't know if you felt like you needed more input. If there's others out there that feel like they have input, email me and we'll get it to Michelle. And if we need to set up a brief meeting, either with a bunch of us to get some thoughts together or with her, we'll do so. Sound good, Michelle?
Yep.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. That's really good discussion. And Lily, can you save the chat at the end of this just so we capture everything?
Yep, will do.
Thank you. Okay, then we'll move on to the next topic. I think it's Rick and Nate.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Fenger from the University of Washington. Nate and I are going to talk to you about a couple of topics today. One is an update to the LOC survey that we're doing through the Open Government Subcommittee underneath the Research Administration Committee. And then additionally, we've been engaging with NSF and Treasury around some of their modernization efforts. And we have some specific details we wanted to share with the group, and then look for some additional participation. So we'll step through that real quick. Next slide, please. So open government, just a reminder why we're doing what we're doing. We're trying to come up with data-driven initiatives, understand how the data standardization and transparency goals that are happening at the Fed are being applied and how they might affect us. And then collaborate across committees. So this is an example of that, where with LOC survey, it's a post-award consideration. The modernization effort with NSF and Treasury is a effort to modernize the letter of credit process. So bringing those together, sharing across committees, and ensuring proper representation and feedback. The co-chairs for the group are Stephanie Endy from Brown, me, and then Avinash from NSF. Our homepage is linked here, so you'll have that. And it's due for an update, but we didn't get there for this session, but it has all the information we need there. Next slide, please. So the survey, why we did it, basically we wanted to assess a common, simple process for burden. There was a request a while ago for from OMB to say, people say burden, 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 but we really don't have an idea of how to measure it or how to really understand whether or not we've affected it in terms of reduction. So we're trying to help that by accumulating data around the process, understanding the data, figuring out what it tells us, seeing if we can generate any insight, and then apply that to whether or not burdensome aspects of what we see can be reduced in any kind of way. And then moving past LOC, we're hopeful to do that with other topics going forward. Next slide, please. So to the survey itself, the leads were Chris Berner from NSF and Nate from Duke. So I'm really speaking to Nate's stuff at this point, but I guess it's just a shared approach. We've had over 29 volunteers over 2 phases. I checked the gallery. It appears that most of the folks that have volunteered are actually on this call. So if anybody wants to chime in either in the chat or raise their hand, feel free. If I mangle anything or if any additional information would be really useful, please join in. The survey itself we've had a work group going since the last September meeting for FDP. So some folks have gotten together, which is, I guess, our second phase, to really pull apart what we collected for the survey, start figuring out what it means to us. So there's been little small group mini analysis projects kicked off. We're in the process of trying to bring together all of the findings and figure out how to stitch together a coherent reflection of what we've learned. We're hopeful that that's going to happen for the next FDP meeting in May, and then work on the steps towards disseminating the report and getting it out to the larger crowd, and more specifically out to support, say, the modernization efforts that we're going to talk about here in a bit. And then I want to call out specific acknowledgement of some of the NSF partners that have participated. Chris Berner has done some analysis on his own for us, and then they even gave us a statistician to help us generate the survey in the beginning, that sort of thing. So thank you. Next slide. Within the survey and what we've seen so far, I don't want to, reveal too much because everybody's still working away, but the survey itself really assessed 5 payment systems, assessed them for ease of use, for the support, the availability of the system, the documentation around the system, and then how well it supports the process in terms of being able to handle volume, the amount of resources that it takes to execute with any one system, the tools that need to be employed in order to make the system more efficient, whether that's local spreadsheets or any other sort of thing. And then areas for improvements that are glaring. So one aspect is the time to receive funds as a measure, and then some of the best and worst features. And then we've got several things that fit into the other category, which includes some text feedback. So people just really kind of writing in their feelings about how the system works, that sort of thing. So we've had a total of 63 respondents, which means we have a pretty hefty batch of feedback to sort through, which gives us pretty good statistical measures. Down in the lower right, I added this just recently because I wanted to share a little bit about what we're seeing, just to give you a taste. But we will understand which system is considered best. I think there's 2 best of breeds out there right now for a variety of reasons. They don't match perfectly. So one's suited for certain reasons versus the other. And then the measure of actually getting the funds, turnaround time, the amount of support that it takes, and the amount of people that need to interact. And then I will say it appears that the reconciliation process, so reconciling our internal systems versus what the Fed systems say, is the majority of the effort from what we can see in the numbers. Next slide, please. So turn it over to Nate for the discussion about the modernization effort.
All right, thanks, Rick. This is Nate Martinez-Wayman from Duke, and I just wanted to talk through, on behalf of the Treasury and NSF, another initiative that looked at the same exact letter of credit systems that we looked at through the survey, and had been going on simultaneously. The team in particular is Craig Fisher at Treasury. Who runs the Financial Innovation and Transformation team, and then Mike Wetglow, who's been a friend of FDP for a long time, on the NSF side that manages ACMS. Deloitte is their technical partner. And this is looking to explore the use of blockchain to enable the grants payment process. So it would step into a lot of the things that we do now and replace them with a different model. Just as a reminder, they were with us a year ago. They came to the January 20 meeting to present their proof of concept at the time, the model that they were trying to build out. Since then, they have created a minimum viable product in an actual system and have been testing that. They went and got some broader federal feedback over the summer, and they came back to some FDP entities. A lot of feedback was provided, and just last week, I believe it was, they reviewed the enhanced version that they've been working on, taking in a lot of the feedback from both the federal agency side and the grantee side. And I believe what's coming next is more continued iterative work along those lines of getting additional feedback and making the enhancements to this pilot version. I know that Craig in particular is also working with OMB to have those conversations about what would be required to take it to the next step, and then to try to get a live pilot implemented with some actual grants and actual grant payments. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that came up last week and then turn it back over to Rick for the possible next conversation that could happen with this team. This is just an image of how they're going to apply blockchain or distributed ledger technology to the cash draw process. There are two of the items in particular that we starred with an FTP star, because I think those are the two where we as grantees have the most interest in providing feedback and seeing how the solution gets built out. They're requesting token transfer, I think is roughly analogous to the physical draw process that we're doing in the multiple letter of credit systems today. And then obviously the reporting impact is a huge potential savings at the end of the project because of the level of transparency that's been happening all along. Just as Michelle's working on the FCTR elimination for us, this has the same type of potential to reduce burden there. Next slide, please. This is just an example again from their presentation of the specific workflow that would happen. And I just wanted to look at this to let folks know that they really are listening to feedback. So when Rick talks about the session coming up, it's, I think, definitely in our interest to participate and see where they're going and make sure that they're getting our perspective. Some of the things that they've already adjusted are the ability to upload files. So, mimicking the technology that's already there for PMS and ACMS in particular. So large universities would be able to upload our data rather than key anything in. That's obviously critically important. And then another really great potential savings is the relationship of subrecipients into the system. So to potentially make it a lot more efficient for subs to request payment, we as the pass-through entity would still have the approval role, but the cash management part of it has the potential to get much more simplified. Next slide, please. Again, if you do have a chance to come to this upcoming session, I would definitely take a look at this after the fact and see if there are any gaps that you think are really critical for this team to think about. These are some of the use cases that they put together during the enhancement process of things that they knew that they had to address in the next version. So as we move forward from here, the more specific use case requirements that we can provide to them, I think the more likely that the final solution really will have everything in scope the way that we hope that it does. Next slide, please. I think, Rick, this is where I'll turn it back to you for that next session.
Sounds good. And then one thing we did discuss, Nate, is the streamlining of reports. So the end of that process, we were talking about it, and you'd said that depending on how they implement it, it could either be really positive in terms of reduction, or it could end up being pretty impactful in a negative way. So I think that's really what we're trying to assess on some of these things is not every improvement is great, but if we can get our input in there, then we can perhaps shape this to a better end. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, but I know you had some keen observations on that part.
Yeah, we'll come back to that at the end if we have time. I want to be sensitive to everyone else presenting.
Sure.
Yeah.
So for this slide, this is a little bit of the sausage making. Essentially what we had was an epiphany that we're far enough down the line with the demo that Treasury and NSF are doing that it warrants a special session. We couldn't quite squeeze that session into FDP week, so we're looking at potentially having that session next week. We're starting to put together the finer points of the paperwork and that sort of thing. So we don't have the details yet in terms of time and the exact date, but we are looking for a larger group of post-award experts to get together and provide feedback specific to this team and their efforts. So you're going to be hearing from us shortly, and some of the advertising we're thinking was obviously mentioning it here with this group, hitting some of the listservs, And then on the next slide, you'll see some of the LOC volunteers so you can understand who's been participating and the institutions that have been participating and some of the connectivity there, if that helps. And then try to get as many post-award experts involved for next week as possible as soon as the details become available. So with that, I think that's our conclusion. And then I know Steve Dowdy had a question in the chat. And Steve, I honestly can't speak to the standard notice of award piece. That's too far out on the pre-award side. So I know that this post-award consideration hasn't looked at that in terms of what we've been talking about, demos and that sort of thing. I don't know if Michelle would want to chime in on that.
And I just threw a perspective in there based on what I've heard in these meetings as well.
Okay. Great. End of report then, I guess.
Great, thanks, guys. Any follow-up questions from anybody? Okay, Tim, let's move on to Treasury offset. I think you have a handful of slides. You're on mute, Tim. Still on mute.
Yep, there you go. Okay,
There we go.
slide. Next slide. Again, I'm Tim Reuter from Stanford University, Senior Director of Post-Award Operations. What is Treasury offset? Treasury, when they will go out to make a payment to a federal institute, one of our institutions, they'll check this database to see if we owe any federal debt, and they will offset the payment to us. You can see in 2020, top recovered $10.4 billion in federal and state delinquent payments. Next slide. This is a law that requires agencies to send outstanding debts to the Treasury when they're 120 days overdue. When they do, they send along the amount of money and our federal employer identification number. Next slide. So the Bureau of Fiscal Service is the one that manages the payments, and they will check the database, and then they will reduce our debt, as I said. Next slide. Just lays it out in a different, you can see that. Go on to the next slide. Okay, this is the letter that you'll get, and this is a copy of a letter I received back in 2016. From the Treasury, you'll get this letter. This is the top half of the letter. The next slide will be the bottom half of the letter. And it basically comes and it, go back one slide for just a second. It'll just tell you that, hey, you know, Palo Alto VA Medical Center is who submitted this outstanding debt to the Treasury offset program. The amount that they claimed that we owed them was $6,000, or no, the amount that they reduced our payment was $6,984. Go to the next slide. What you'll see in the bottom half of the letter, and what I have highlighted here in red that is not highlighted in your normal letter, but I highlighted it here, is that it's very clear that they're just telling you it was reduced. And if it was an error or if you have any questions on it, don't contact the Treasury. You have to contact the agency listed on the front page. So right away, there's a disconnect between the Treasury offset program and who you're really pulling it for. You'll see down at the bottom with the two big arrows that I have, they tell me here that the payment they were gonna make to me was for $6,985.38. They reduced that payment by $6,984.38. So they're sending me a payment for $1, which is, you know, it's at least good that they've done that. So I've got some sort of a clue as to why this payment wasn't received in full, and it's $1. And you can tell at that point what's going on. Next slide. So now the fun begins, because you don't know what invoice from the, in my instance, the VA was, you know, what invoice specifically wasn't paid. The letter is now sent to directly to the same person that they sent that invoice to. So if that person is either gone from your institution or ignored the original invoice, them getting this notice, not sending it on to central office at your institution, where you're collecting these normal federal payments, you know, for sponsored awards, when the payment that they're offsetting for is a non-sponsored activity, you're stuck in the middle. And as you can see also, that the offset will never equal the unpaid invoice amount. So you start to lose any connection between what invoices out there and what offset that they've taken to it. Next slide. So here's an example. I have a note from, an unpaid invoice from the VA for $25,000. I'd say I had an invoice out there to the Air Force. They offset that payment and I got $1, which left $18,000 remaining. So then the next, they'll go back in and look for the next payment I have due. Just for my example, I just show it's $20,000. So my second payment would be for $1,798.32. Again, if you have multiple payments for under, this $20,000, they could offset 5, 6, 7 payments to you and send you $1 on 6 or 7 of them. And if it's different federal agencies that they're offsetting that for, you could get 4, 5, 6 letters on one outstanding invoice amount. Next slide, please. So the VA, from my experience, what I'm dealing with, and again, I'm picking on the VA here, and I don't mean to totally throw them under the bus, but these are the things and the frustrations we've had here at Stanford, and I've had at other institutions I've been at trying to deal with this issue. The VA tells me that they cannot tell from their system what invoices have been sent to the top offset program. They say their system automatically identifies anything over 120 days. So the other thing that comes into play here is if the department pays the outstanding invoice to the VA after the VA collects the payment or in the time that they've sent that payment to the top offset program, the VA has been paid twice. Now, I've been told by more than one person at the VA that the VA does not like to issue refunds. It creates a lot of work for them. So what they have done is they take the duplicate payment and they apply that against some other open invoice that we have from Stanford. So now I've lost connection between the original unpaid invoice and where the top offset was paid. Next slide, please. So another potential impact to your institution, and this happened to Stanford over the summer, federal agencies can issue a new award to us if we have outstanding federal debt. So I had a situation where the top offset had been taken and yet the agency had not notified top offset or whatever, or reduced this amount of an outstanding federal debt. So the agency would not release this award to us because we had outstanding federal debt, yet I had specific notification that had been paid. Now, to VA's credit, I wrote to them and asked them for help, and they did send emails back to me that I was able to forward on to this awarding agency that they eventually allowed us to receive that new award. But still, it's a lot of work to do for that. Last slide here. So these are my suggested potential changes. I won't read them. They're there for you to look at. I'll just try to stop talking and see if there's any questions from Michelle or any comments from anybody else.
What do you think, Michelle? Is that nuts?
It's more than
You
nuts.
believe that? I mean, yeah.
The one that really got me was where our colleague talks about the fact that there was a need to, they sent in a payment where they were paid twice and that they apply instead of sending it back because it's too much work for them. My goodness. They applied it to another credit. I actually find that to be a huge audit issue.
You ought to try to reconcile it on our side. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So thoughts on this, Michelle? I mean, I remember when Tim brought this up, it was an in-person meeting, I don't know, a year or two ago, and I know you've heard a bit about this. Is this committee, how do you suggest we approach this? Because the burden is so ridiculously disproportionate to these dollars. I mean, it's crazy.
I think the problem is, and this is where we've run into with PMS. The problem is that they have the fact that they have several agencies should have one office that has information pertaining to all of these Treasury offset programs. And the challenge there is that typically this is handled out of, well, at least at the NIH, it's handled out of the compliance office, and we work very closely with our Office of Management, Financial Management, and then of course PMS. And so a large part of the issue is that, at least within the enterprise, is that this responsibility resides largely with the grants management officials that issue the federal funding. I actually don't know that we have these kinds of significant problems because we do try to be more coordinated through OER, Opera, and then working with OFM. But I see in the chat, someone was saying that maybe there should be a VA review. I guess the question I have for you, Tim, is this something that you find across various federal agencies, or is the VA just their challenges are so egregious that, you know, maybe we would want to look at them and work with someone within the VA on their specific challenges? Do you find this across the federal spectrum?
Really, I think there might have been in my history a few other agencies, but this is almost solely the VA that has really been a pain. As I've looked through many of the chats, many people have also stated that it's an issue they're having with the VA.
Mm-hmm.
So that means, Tim, if you don't have a VA, I'm looking in the chat, others are seeing this, right? From Medicaid, I mean, from other areas, they're seeing other offsets, although VA looks like it's the most significant.
Yeah.
Jim, do you know whether the VA has are they a member of FDP?
No.
They are not, but there has been some discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Nate, were you going to say something?
I was just going to echo what Tim said, and I see that Marcia Smith has already noted this as well, that there's within the Treasury, there's a connection between the top and their do not pay system, which some federal agencies review before issuing an award. So we also went through this this past summer. It took an inordinate amount of work, but we did make some good staff connections at the Treasury to help navigate between the do not pay and the top. So that may be an avenue that we can take, not just with the VA since they're not yet a member, but we could see if we could partner with the Treasury somehow to at least get a better awareness of the connection between the systems and where to go when we do have issues.
Yeah, but even with the do not pay system, well, and this might be the case, but I mean, our grants management officials check that system as well. That's a pre-award risk tool, and they check it as well. But there's nothing from that do not pay system from within the grant systems that stops them, and they actually can identify what the challenges are. But even in this case, I wouldn't think that they would be putting folks on a do not pay list because there's a debt owed to the government. I mean, that's not a part of the regulatory requirements. So I take issue with that.
Thank you for doing that on our behalf.
Denise Moody just responded that the Boston VA Research Institute is a member and is the first VA nonprofit. We'd be happy to discuss.
Yeah, I saw that. That would be great. Of course, there were 3 different VA institutions in the Boston area that I got to deal with when I was in Boston. So, but yeah, that'd be great. I'd be happy to reach out and to start any conversation with the VA. I have had quite a few conversations with the Palo Alto VA. They've worked very hard with us, but still been able to provide us minimal information.
Tim, could you even estimate how many person hours Stanford has spent on this $6,000 charge? I mean, could you even fathom?
Well, this $6,000 charge was from 2018, and I just got a copy of the one invoice from them just back in November. We spend on any one of these, we probably spend 20 hours a minimum on trying to figure out what payment this was for so that I can then go back to the individual school of medicine department. These are really generated from IPAs where Stanford will go to the VA, which is located very close to Stanford, and hire one of their clinicians to come over and work at Stanford Medical Center. So this is what generates it. So they'll send the invoice to an individual school of medicine, say department of you know, whatever, some clinical department. It won't get paid. It'll go several months and then it gets to the top offset. And then me trying to get a copy of this, the letter then gets sent back to the individual department and not to me centrally. So I have no way of knowing. And that's why my one suggestion is it'd be nice if there was at least a copy of the letter that got sent to some central office so that I would know who in the world I could go to in whatever specific school of medicine department to tell them to pay me. Because once I don't receive the payment, I can't close down in my award, because I've got outstanding payments on an award centrally that I don't have full payment for. So now I have to leave this award open for months and years until I can determine who I'm going to collect that money from centrally at Stanford.
So Michelle, we'll work with Tim and others to draft up a little bit of detail, and then either you can help through FDP, or you can give us some joint directions, or we can work with the VA and whomever. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, I think we do need to work. I think the group, we probably, I mean, if you're going to do a working group, it probably would be good, but you're going to have to work with the VA, because unfortunately, I just don't have that kind of experience, and our systems are set up so that it's centralized a little bit more. And so I wouldn't even know, I don't even know how to, aside from look at their infrastructure and look at how they're processing these, I wouldn't even know what to say. I just wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start out with reaching out to Denise Moody at the Boston VA, and we'll continue to follow up through the VA out here in Palo Alto. Thanks very much for your guys' time.
Yeah, and I will actually try to see if I can find someone either in a policy office or a compliance function within the VA here to figure out who we can tap to participate in this group if they have interest, or at least I could try to convince them to do this. It's very the contracting side. I might be able to identify someone from the contracting side, but that would be very different from that grant side unless they have a combined office.
Right.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Tim. That was really helpful. And thanks, Michelle. Thanks for everybody's input. This was just based on the sheer number of comments. It's clearly a broad issue. Okay. I think our next topic, Melissa, next slide. Okay, great. You're there. Melissa?
Yep. Could I have the next slide, please? So hi, I'm Melissa Korf from Harvard Medical School, and I'm also the co-chair of the Research Compliance Committee, formerly co-chair of the Data Stewardship Committee. You know, data is my life. I love talking about data, and I'm really excited that NIH has come out with their final NIH policy for data management and sharing. This feels like it's been a long time in the making, and I don't know, Michelle and her colleagues might agree with that as well. A lot of work went into it on NIH's end. A lot of opportunities to receive public comment on the final product, and it's great that it's here and we can start to dig into what it's going to mean for institutions to implement. I only put one link here, but of course, when the final policy was posted, there were 3 separate supplemental information documents that were posted as well. I think the one that's most relevant for our discussion here is the one related to allowable costs for data management and sharing. We talked a little bit about, you know, the policy more broadly in the contracts and data stewardship session earlier today. And a lot of institutions are really just at the beginning phases of thinking through implementation. So we're really in a good spot here to maybe have some impact and work together on how we think through some of these issues. Just a couple snippets from that supplemental information. Allowable costs submitted in budget requests must be incurred during the performance period. With something like data management and sharing, where you're expected to retain data for several years, the policy allows us enough flexibility to decide based on the data type, the data set, how long that would be. But a lot of the costs then associated with maintaining that data might be incurred well after the period of performance. And so how can we adequately budget for and account for our costs associated with compliance, but also ensure that they're incurred within the period of performance? I think there's going to be some unique challenges for our institutions there. And budget requests must not include infrastructure costs that are included in institutional overhead. So, a little bit similar to when groups like FDP tackled the single IRB policy coming out of NIH. I think there's going to be a lot of conversations for our institutions as we try to think through what can be included in a budget as a direct cost and what have we already included in our indirect cost base, and so we can't double count that expense. Some of the costs that may be included in the NIH budget request, specifically for data management and sharing, curation of data and development of supporting documentation, local data management considerations, and then preserving and sharing the data through established repositories. So I think that means, if a repository charges a fee in order to deposit your data there, that would be an allowable expense. Next slide, please. So we have a unique opportunity potentially to collaborate with some of our COGR colleagues. For those of you who might be a little newer to the FDP and sort of, understanding the differences between organizations like FDP and COGR, COGR will advocate for certain policy or regulatory requirements, and will actually submit comments. So when NIH was posting their draft policies or their RFIs and prep for preparing the draft policy, COGR would submit comments. FDP does not submit comments, but we have a unique opportunity because we have folks like Michelle who are actually part of our organization and can collaborate with us on different things, whereas COGR is more an organization made up of member institutions who receive federal funds. So the COGR working group on this same policy has just begun. In the very initial phases of talking through some different potential ways that COGR and FDP might be able to collaborate together on sort of helping our respective member institutions comply and implement this policy, while, as is near and dear to FDP's heart, keeping in mind mitigating the addition of administrative burden. So one suggestion, and I think that some of the issues are a little bit different, like that issue in terms of, well, not all of our costs are going to be incurred within the period of performance, and how can we tackle that? But certainly in terms of is this a direct or an indirect expense decision, and when can I include something as a direct expense, is very similar to the discussions we had related to the single IRB policy a few years ago. And so similar to the FAQs that FDP worked with NIH to draft and develop for that policy, it might be a great project for us to take on to try to come up with similar FAQs in terms of, or work with Michelle in her office to request additional guidance on what we really can be including in these budgets. I'm really interested, I guess it was maybe a couple of years ago now, we had a great presentation from the STRIDES initiative. So, if you want to go back and take a look at some of the old session presentations, the notes from that session are available. But the STRIDES initiative, generally speaking, is an NIH initiative where they've tried to sort of use the collective purchasing power of all of NIH and its award recipients to negotiate for lower prices for cloud computing and storage services. So we could, think through either exploring other opportunities like that to help try to control the costs associated with compliance, or perhaps it's just helping to raise awareness in our membership of programs like this that already exist. And one other possible suggestion as it relates to the costs is to take a look at some of the cost estimators that are out there. Because I think, trying to look forward to one of the main cost related questions I'm going to receive from my faculty members is, well, how am I supposed to know what to put into the budget for this? How am I supposed to know how much it's going to cost me to clean the data? How am I supposed to know how much it's going to cost me to store it? And so I put a link there to the NIMH Data Archive Cost Estimator that was published along with NIMH's data sharing policy. I think also, give or take 1 or 2 years ago now, as an example of we could explore tools like that, evaluate published tools for whether or not we think that they adequately cover all of the costs. Are there any issues with allowability or, inadvertent inclusion of direct or indirect decisions? Would we want to come up with our own tool that we could pilot for the inclusion of costs? And I think other suggestions are welcome too. The Data Stewardship Subcommittee is going to be trying to tackle sort of, whatever we can do to help with sort of the broad implementation of a policy. And we're very interested in collaborating with our finance, audit, and costing colleagues to try to help pay for it.
Thanks, Melissa. Michelle, do you have any observations on this? I know it's not a new issue. It's something that you've thought about for years, long before this policy was finalized.
I don't have any observations, but I do like some of the tools and the ideas that Melissa has shared with us today. I actually am really intrigued by this Strides initiative because I think that is an excellent model and could absolutely contain costs. I would like to see a group put together and maybe even looking at some of these initiatives and coming up with a white paper that would promote some of these ideas. Because I'm not sure, one of the things I think about, so let me just speak to one area that I know everyone probably has thought about and Melissa raised, was the problem and the challenge that folks are having because some of these costs will be outside of the performance period after the grant is over. I mean, and that is just a fact. That is exactly what's going to happen. It's a challenge that we found even in the clinical trials reporting. A lot of the stuff is done after the fact, but this is really about charging. And when if the grant is in a closeout stage, that's simply just an unallowable cost. But one of the things we thought about too is, these cost extensions. But I don't know how long we can have cost extensions. It's not ideal, may even be administratively burdensome for everyone to be able to charge some of these costs. But maybe the thought is having this cost estimator kind of tool that could estimate costs beyond the project period, and maybe highlighting the charges, at the end or during a project period extension. Once the grant is over, of course, the charges cannot be made because the grant's over. And that becomes a whole other cost principle, OMB, challenge. But these are some really good ideas in terms of looking at estimators, looking at ways that we can, maybe we need to look at longer project periods for these kinds of awards, which, you know, that's something I thought about. But if you think about it, this applies to everything, right? So do we look at thinking about, you know, petitioning for maybe longer project periods for grants, or having
Michelle, I was going to, yeah.
or having a
I
specific
wonder,
program for these kinds of costs, you know.
yeah, so a specific program is a good idea, but the other idea is this require a real paradigm shift about how we think about these costs? And, you know, in 10 years, you know, 10 years from now, this idea that all these costs have to happen within the performance period, can we prepay data costs, right? I mean, do we need to shift the paradigm to really appreciate the magnitude of the change that we're talking about here, right? I mean, what we're contemplating is different than anything we've done before, and we should think about it differently than we've ever done before from a costing
Yeah,
standpoint.
I agree with that. I think the challenge there is that, you know, that is within the OMB realm. And so we need to,
Right.
if in fact we're thinking about that, maybe that's an area where we would, you know, petition OMB to allow us to charge, you know, costs that are prepaid costs in these areas.
Right.
Or highlighting the fact that we may need a specific program, specific grant mechanism, you know, that allows for these charges to be made at the, you know, that institutions can apply for, more like the Strides program, really containing it and moving it in from a, let's include it in our grant, this particular project, but saying, look, these are the costs that we're going to need. So we're going to apply for a data management and sharing grant and obtain costs that way. So, I mean, I think we do have to look at it differently, but I would want to look at something that's a little more within NIH's realm than having to petition OMB. That might take a little longer.
Okay. Sure.
But I'm
Yeah,
not opposed to it, because I think it's very important. It's mandatory. It's required, and we need to figure out how to make it work for everyone.
Yeah, and I stating the obvious, I think the greatest concern is it'll just be cost shifted to the university somehow as an indirect cost or some other unfunded mandate. And, you know, most of us are well over the cap, and these are costs that are not trivial. Like, these are really significant. So any closing thoughts on that, Michelle? Because we do have, I guess, 3 quick final topics that we want to try to hit before, and we have 15 minutes left. Next slide.
It would be good to hear from others, not just me. Just to hear if everyone would be willing to maybe do some sort of demonstration and pull together some tools that might be helpful, and ideas like the Strides initiative, and try to start poking holes through that and see if that's something that we could think about and push forward. It would be good for us to just hear as much as we can from others.
Okay, I think this one clearly makes sense to be a working group that we really explore and get the details and collaborate with Melissa and what she's doing and so forth. Do you agree, Michelle?
Yeah, Melissa, this was really well thought out. Thank you very much for sharing.
Great, thank you. Next slide.
Thank you.
Did you want to briefly talk about this, Michelle? Or have you kind of?
No, I think what we talked about was that we have this migration going on now. And I know that we have some challenges that we're facing even as I speak. One of the things that I would like to kind of know and understand from you all's perspective is, I know that, you know, if the FFR expenditure report is due before the next cash transaction, which means that the disbursement in the payment management system is out of date, folks are really having a hard time having the the disbursement data updated, because you can't do that. It's not a fillable area. I would really like to hear from you guys about how this is impacting you, how the migration has worked, some examples of things we need to be thinking about and considering. This is not just a NIH issue. This is probably department wide. So it's got to be, if the problem is a challenge for us, I know it's got to be a challenge for you. So I'd be interested in hearing some of the transition challenges and issues that you're facing with this.
Anyone? I see Marcia Smith, I think, has her hand raised. Can you unmute her?
Thank
Lily?
you. I'm speaking because no one else is, and I think this is a really important issue, and I'm not an expert in this area, but I work with staff who are. It's a tremendous problem to try to get the FFR, the cash balance and the FCTR to all match at the same time. And when they don't, we're unable to submit a report at all.
Yep.
And this is a major problem. In speaking to my director yesterday, she mentioned the fact that we might have to change the order in which we do things like draw cash before we submit the FFR, because if it doesn't match, it won't go through. And knowing that the FCTR is going away eventually is great, but in the meantime, we essentially have to revise the FCTR with every FFR we submit.
Yeah, either you're going to have to hold the FFR until the FTCR is submitted, but that is exactly right. And I don't think that this was a problem when it was coming through the agencies, but it's definitely a challenge now because of the PMS data.
So my simple proposal, because I don't know better, is to say you need to uncouple that requirement for matching at least until the FCTR goes away and we can figure out how to make the other two things match.
And so,
am I right, Nate?
if you are right, I mean, I think that that would be a great idea. The problem is that the payment management PSC folks, as we've talked to them, for some reason, they think that this will break the system. So it's not within NIH's power. It may be a scenario where the institutions and the entities recipients need to go forward to PMS to ask for those to be uncoupled. But I doubt very seriously that will happen. I think what we need to do is push for this elimination sooner rather than later. And that's something that I can absolutely push on.
That would be fantastic. I can't underestimate how much additional work this is causing our financial team, and NIH at our institution, like most others, is the largest sponsor of our research. And
Yep.
and we want to submit financial reports on time. So all of those things are being jeopardized.
Yeah, I have to tell you that, and I appreciate it because, and trust me, I really, I can be touched with it. I've received, I don't know how many phone calls about this. It is just a problem, and it's increased my workload as well. So I'm absolutely in it with you, and I will certainly be moving to push to eliminate it sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks a lot.
So Deborah Goldberg also has a comment.
Yes, hi, thanks. I echo what Marcia's comments were with regard to the additional burden it's caused on our operational areas. My suggestion, and I kind of came a little after the initial conversation earlier, was would it be possible, and I know, Michelle, you just remarked that you thought this might cause some sort of problem at the PMS level. But if the final FFRs were managed akin to the non-final FFRs, where those fields are editable, that would take care of this challenge of the three-way match. So if that could be done for non-finals, perhaps it could be done for finals.
So I
you.
actually asked that question. I'm going to ask that again, though, just to see if that response has changed, given all of the challenges that folks have had. I was told no, though. They said that area should not be editable. And my point to them is it doesn't work when it's at a central location. If we had it at the at the NIH, we could at least work with the institutions, like our Office of Financial Management has done over many years, where they had this unexpended balance area that we could just put the numbers in there to try to get it to line up. But this has been, I mean, it's just, I don't know what else to say aside from I am absolutely willing to ask if that field can be editable until at least until we can get this FCTR retired.
Right, Lana, I'll go ahead and unmute you.
Maybe a final
Great.
comment here, and then we'll try to get to the other ones. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Lana Mateo from the University of Vermont. Now that the FFRs have transitioned to PMS, one comment and desire that we have is that there's a really good and clear communication for and understanding for us who do we go to, because there's some problems that have to be resolved by PMS. Other problems need to be resolved by the grants management specialists. And sometimes we get into the situation where we're really in the middle of it, where PMS tells us to go to NIH and NIH tells us to go to PMS. And we are in this vicious loop. We've dealt, for years related to draws on these issues. And now, because we're going to be doing more in PMS, there's going to be more of it. So that's all I'm asking for. We just don't want to.
Well, I will say that the only time that they should be pointing you guys back, honestly, is if you guys don't understand how to properly fill out the FFR. And I doubt that that's the case. The real issue.
That's not the case.
Right.
There are multiple examples of what PMS tells us to go to the agencies for.
Hey, can you share that with me? Because there's really, I mean, when you think about it, the field that is preventing you from submitting it is the one that is not editable. And so we don't have the authority to do anything in PMS as well. What they've been saying is, well, the agency needs to tell the recipient to revise the FFR. Well, the agency doesn't need to tell the recipient that. PMS does. That's a one-stop shop. So that's really discouraging to hear. So if you could provide examples so that Lillian can capture those for us, and I can go back and look at them with my team, I'm happy to help there.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you guys should not be having this ping pong ball scenario. It's not productive.
Do we have time for?
In the old days, Michelle, if we were meeting in person, we might invite somebody from HHS to come join for this discussion, just so they could hear the university perspective. If there's a way we can do that virtually, we're happy to set something up.
Well, I think that that's something that if this is going to be a working group, perhaps the working group can bring that forward, that idea forward, and we can try to help facilitate that.
Okay, great. Okay, great. This was really
and it would
helpful.
Be helpful for
Go ahead,
us too, because I really do think that is that's a challenge for the recipients to have to go to the agency and then be told to go back to PMS. When it was with ERA, we did work with our Office of Financial Management to help facilitate some of this, but there's just simply the only other way to fix this is to, I think Nate said, you got to wait until the FCTR is due, and everything has to be done in order. And the agency is issuing a guide notice to that effect. But I really do think that there has to be another way to try to work through some of this. I really do.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. This looks like another working group. We have two more topics that at least maybe we can introduce in the closing 3 minutes. Next slide. Thank you. Yeah, Janet.
Great.
If you could introduce, I hate to ask you to do this,
Yeah.
Janet, but if you could introduce it, and then we'll turn it to Christy to introduce hers, and then we can
Absolutely.
get input. Great, wonderful.
Great. So one of the items that we wanted to present this afternoon is really looking at agencies that have different mechanisms for formal deobligations for small dollars. And so the most current example that we have is, of course, a deobligation for 51 cents. It did not ask for a response to that, but we've had others that might be less than $100. So we wanted to just introduce the topic for a conversation to see if we could have explore some consistency or expectations surrounding these small dollar deobligations.
Why don't we hit the second one, Christy, and then we can see if
Sure.
Michelle has questions on both of these. Thank you. Thank you, Janet.
Thanks,
Christy?
Jim. Yes, so I wanted to introduce the topic of the pennies and small credits. At my institution, we frequently see this after the FFR has been filed. The departments may be doing some cleanup and IDC posts, it gets rounded or something, or maybe fringe was miscalculated and a small credit balance appears on the account. This kind of circles back to the FFR migration now, where we have to revise the FFR, reduce the budget. It's not going to match what's in PMS. Timing issues, perhaps the first FFR is still passing through the system. So I think this kind of all ties back together with the FFR migration to PMS. And I think these two topics could easily be tied together.
Michelle, any
I
quick
agree with
comments
that.
on those?
I agree with that. One of the things we were trying to do is not, I think this is a topic that I've raised with HHS a few times, and I think that they are looking at whole dollar requirements. I don't know where they are with that one. Let me check on that again with one of my staff members, but I do think that this is one that could easily be rolled in, even though I don't know that this will go away with the expenditure reports either, right? Because you just got to make the requirement for whole dollar charges. And I forget, there's some appropriations language that I feel was an issue initially. I just can't remember what that was.
Well, the small credits though, Michelle, as we talked about, if we get a credit for $4 2 years after the end of the grant from a vendor, it's extremely costly to go through the whole process of revising the FCTR, returning a letter of credit, running the FCTR. You have to do something with it. HHS has to do something with it for $6. So we have no problem cutting a check to the Treasury. It's not about the money. It's about 2 years after the end of the grant, going through the process to open everything up and refiling it. And if you remember, with uniform guidance, there was some discussion at one point. I thought about $500. I thought there was some discussion around trying to stop the burden related to this kind of thing at closeout. Well after the end of
There
the
was
award.
a discussion, but I think that there again was a challenge with the coming up with the amount that agencies have the authority to forgive.
I see.
So we just need to look at that one again, because that just is not going to go away. Though, and I don't think we should consolidate that one with the FFR one, Christy, to be honest with you. I think we should give it its due attention.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, great. Last slide, please. So as we go to the last slide, it sounds like we talked about potentially a number of working groups. Michelle, I'll get my notes together and make sure you're in agreement, and then we'll get it out to this group. Thanks to the co-presenters. Michelle, thank you for your participation, and for everybody else. Over on the right-hand side, and Michelle, I'm going to ask you for closing comments here in 10 seconds. But over on the right-hand side, these are the things we've talked about. If you're interested in helping out, any of the things we've talked about, We will mine the chat. We will save that. But let me, and Lynette Arias is helping me kind of project coordinate some of this. Let us know so that as we get volunteers together for input, we can reach out to you. Michelle, any closing thoughts?
No, I think this was a good good session. I really do. I think it's something we need to definitely form the groups and get the white papers in place, and see how we can prioritize some of these, and where we have some low-hanging fruit and move forward.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks all. Please email me and Lynette and let us know of your interest, and we'll reach back out to get people together. Thank you so much for your time.